When it comes to mechanical and automatic watches, words like reliability and robustness are relative terms, subject to the reality that these tiny mechanical devices are actually somewhat fragile. Yes, our favorite timepieces should keep running worry-free for years, but we do need to use a modicum of thought and care in how we treat them over those years and over the course of their lives. As the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. What's up YouTube, I'm Guy, and today I'm sharing my top 5 things that you should never do to your watch if you want to keep it working and looking as good as possible for years to come. Now this list could have been 10 or even more items long, but I think that these are the most important things that you need to pay attention to and be aware of if you're going to be investing your time and of course your money into this hobby. That said, I do want to hear from you guys, so let me know in the comments what are some of the most important things that you've learned that you should never do to your watches. Number 1 is overwinding your watch, and I think a lot of people are going to be surprised to hear that this applies to both mechanical hand-wind watches as well as watches with automatic self-winding movements, but in different ways. So first, let's talk about the mechanical watches. A mechanical watch is one that needs to have its mainspring wound on a daily basis via rotating the crown manually. The risk of overwinding these watches is that if you try to continue turning the crown past the full wind on the mainspring, you can either break the spring itself or possibly the stem of the crown. Now on modern mechanical watches, this is a pretty hard mistake to make. Once it's fully wound, you feel the resistance pushing back and it's obvious that it's time to stop. But on older vintage watches, it can be easier to accidentally push right through that point and break the mechanism. So don't go cranking on the crown with a ton of force and don't rush it. Slow and steady wins the race. But what about automatic watches? Now everyone knows that you can't overwind an automatic watch. It has protections built into the movement that cause the mainspring to slip so that it can't overwind and break. And yes, I suppose that's true, but that's not what we're talking about here. On some extremely common and very popular automatic movements, and we're looking at you ETA 2824, there is an inherent weakness in the gear chain between the crown and the mainspring barrel. That flaw in the design means that long-term stress through constant winding of the crown can cause the movement to fail sooner than expected. In the owner's manuals of some watch brands, they will suggest that you only wind the movement via the crown maybe 5 or 10 times, just enough to get the movement started, and then you wear the watch, letting the motion of your wrist automatically wind the rest of the power reserve. So my recommendation is this: read your owner's manual before you manually wind your watch more than occasionally. Number 2 is proper water care, and water is probably one of the top killers of mechanical timepieces. Without quickly having it addressed, through service and a full cleaning of the entire watch movement, if a watch has a water intrusion event, it will almost certainly suffer long-term damage. And unfortunately, a lot of times we might not even know when a little water has gotten in. Now that said, there are some of my best practice advices when it comes to how to deal with your watches around water. First, let's talk about water resistance ratings, and nearly all watches come with a rating that states the safe depth or pressure with which a watch can withstand. However, those ratings can be wildly misleading and they cause a lot of confusion for people. For example, most fine dress watches come with a 30-meter water resistance rating, but does that really mean that you can take a watch like that 100 feet underwater? Most people would say absolutely not. A 30-meter rated watch isn't safe for swimming, and that's according to conventional wisdom. So why is that? Well, I'm gonna be perfectly honest, I have no idea why watches are rated for different depths, but in reality aren't recommended for that kind of pressure. The moral of the story is that you should always refer to your owner's manual or the manufacturer about what exactly is safe when it comes to your watch and water. Next, it's important to point out that some watches have screwed-on crowns, others don't. And some watches have other buttons or pushers, like a chronograph or even moon phase watches, that control the functionality of those complications. Now, whether it's your crown or a chronograph pusher, or any other button for that matter, never ever use those controls while the watch is submerged or has been recently wet for that matter. Pulling out the crown or starting your chronograph in or around water is a surefire way to let water in, and it should never be done. Regarding screw-down crowns, there's a widely accepted but incorrect perception that all watches with screw-down crowns are more water-resistant when the crown is screwed down. Now, in some cases this is true, like on Rolex watches with trip-lock crowns, as the crown does have extra seals that engage when it is screwed in. But a lot of watches don't have additional gaskets or seals, and the only real purpose of screwing that crown down is to prevent the user from accidentally pulling it out while it's underwater. The same goes for a lot of chronographs with screw-down pushers. It's a safety mechanism to keep the buttons from being pushed. It doesn't add additional sealing. The number 3 item on my list of watch killers is magnetism. And to be perfectly clear, magnets won't kill your watch, but should it become magnetized, it will probably become wildly inaccurate, running minutes or even hours fast per day. And we've never been more surrounded by magnets than we are today. Cell phones, tablets, laptops, and any other device that has a speaker in it has one or more magnets. And getting your watch too close to those magnets can inadvertently magnetize your watch's hairspring. Now, if you have a watch that is suddenly running fast, grab a small, cheap compass and move it around the watch, and if the compass needle moves as it passes the watch, the odds are that it's magnetized. Now, there are cheap devices that you can buy for under 20 bucks that will demagnetize a watch. But if the watch is of any value to you, I'd suggest taking it to a watchmaker and having it professionally checked before trying to demagnetize it. Because here's the thing, those devices can actually magnetize metal if it's not done correctly, and you could make your situation even worse. But fortunately, a lot of watch brands are building their products with anti-magnetic hairsprings made of things like silicone, and they have other technology built into the design that will prevent magnetism. So hopefully over the coming years, this will probably become a thing of the past, and it's something that we won't even need to concern ourselves with. The fourth thing that you can do to your watch that could cause it to have to take a trip in for repair is incorrectly setting the date complication. Now, this is obviously a non-issue for time-only watches with no date complication, and it's something that I'm sure most of you guys are already aware of, but it's always good to have a reminder. Watches with a day and or date complication can be damaged if you try to set the date within a certain time range. Generally, between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m., you shouldn't change the date of your watch, as this is the time that the gears that flip the calendar wheel are engaged. Now, attempting to set the day or date when those gears are engaged can cause enough damage to completely break the mechanism. A good rule of thumb here is that when you want to set your date, advance the time forward to 6:30, then set the date, and set it to the day prior to what you actually want. Now you can advance the hands forward till the date flips to the current date, and then you can set the correct time. This is the procedure that I do whenever I pick up a watch that hasn't been running it for a while, and I've never had an issue. All right, so the fifth and final thing that you shouldn't do to your watch is over-polish it, especially the at-home DIY polish jobs. Now, I know this is subjective, and I'm sure that some smart is going to argue the semantics of whether or not an over-polished watch is, quote-unquote ruined. And look, if you like the look of a watch with an amateur finish and rolled over case edges, hey, you do you. But the overwhelming majority of us would rather have a watch with some beauty marks than a badly over-polished case and bracelet. Now, the main culprit that we're talking about here is, of course, Cape Cod cloths. And I'll say they're not a terrible product. I use them from time to time on gold and silver jewelry, as well as inexpensive beater watches. But I don't use them on any watch that represents a meaningful amount of money, and I don't even bother to try to take deep scratches out with them. What I have found is that, yes, they will shine up dull metal surfaces decently enough, But it's nowhere near a factory finish on a luxury watch, and under close inspection, it actually leaves behind tiny micro abrasions that give the surface sort of a hazy, cloudy look. Another technique I've done on cheaper watches, especially bracelets and clasps that are overly worn out, is to reapply a brushed finish using a green Scotch-Brite pad. Just like with the Cape Cod cloths though, it yields reasonably acceptable results, but it's nowhere near the fine brushed finish that you find on a factory fresh, high quality timepiece. So I'd avoid it on any watch that you actually care about. Now I know, it is easy to obsess over the little nicks and scratches our watches pick up, and the temptation to try to correct them at home is real, but I suggest leaving this kind of work to the professionals and only having it done during regular service intervals, which is to say probably something like every few years at the absolute most. All right, guys, that's my 5 tips on what you should never do to your watch. I hope you enjoyed the video. And again, don't forget to leave your tips and tricks on things that you think you should never do to watches that you've picked up over the years down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and of course turn on notifications so you don't miss any future episodes. Finally, you guys can check out the description of the video for a list of ways that you can help me out and support what I'm doing here on YouTube, including using my Amazon affiliate link when you're shopping on Amazon to buy anything that I've reviewed, or frankly anything else for that matter. And a big thanks to the guys that have been using that link. I do really appreciate it. Those small commissions that I get do add up and they help me out a lot. And with that said, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna wrap this one up for today. I'm gonna sign off and say bye now.